And again, I learned an awful lot from looking at this. I had an assumption that there was only one Shem Tov, and then it turns out that there's a few different people
Yes.
who, and I thought it was because of the name of God, but there's another way of looking at his name that it's kind of this reputation,
Mm-hmm.
a good standing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyway, we'll do the intro. I am recording. Okay. Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. You've joined us for our third discussion on Meeting the Sages, where Rabbi Neely introduces us to one of the famous names of Judaism, one of the sages. This guy this week, the Baal Shem Tov, and someone asked me during the week, "Are you going to be doing the Baal Shem Tov?" And I said, "Mind your own business." You're spoiling it for everybody. But yeah, we are, and that's
Well,
today.
they probably saw the Temple Israel post for I let
Oh,
my congregation know that we were doing it on the Shabbat. So
there you go.
uh,
You can go to Rabbi Neely's synagogue page, and you'll get a heads up of what's coming in the future. So this guy for me, I mean, we spoke about Rambam before, but this guy for me is more of a traditional rabbi. When I think about him, he's in the right part of Europe at the right time. This big, melting pot of history, and there's desolation, and it's dirty, and everyone's having a really hard time. And then out of this dark, there's these amazing series of people who cause such light. So can you give us an introduction into what his real name was, where he lived, his community, and that kind of thing?
sure. So yeah, the Baal Shem Tov in particular is very easy to characterize through the stereotypes because, like you say, he fits where and when most people think of traditional Judaism in a way that seems similar to what they think of traditional Judaism today. But in fact, he was a revolutionary, and the time that he lived in was a little different than people sometimes give it credit for. This is the beginning of an era, so you don't see all of the things that will eventually become the basis for later stereotypes. So Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, who will eventually become known as Baal Shem Tov, he wasn't, of course, born as Baal Shem Tov. He wasn't born as rabbi, but he is born in this nexus age and a nexus region. He is born in an area of Europe that, if you look at a map today, looks very static and boring. But if you look at a map back in the 1690s, he was born in 1698, and through the 1700s, it was an area of huge turmoil and flux. It was the border area between Poland and the Ukraine, and as well as the northern reach of the Ottoman Empire. And all three of those played a very important role in shaping the politics and the culture of this region. People sometimes forget how far north the Ottoman Empire's reach was at the height of its imperial aspirations. And even what it couldn't conquer, it still had massive cultural influence on. So he is born to a relatively modest, probably poor family, which is made even worse when his parents die while he is still a child. And so he becomes an orphan and therefore a ward of the community. The idea of a full adoption, the way we have in the modern world, in the Jewish community as well as the secular, really didn't exist under classical Jewish law. It's something that we've been able to develop, and thank goodness for that, really. So most orphans were simply cared for by the community, rather than specifically brought into an official adoption form of another family. So he's raised not exactly by himself, but he's definitely raised without the hardcore family structure. And he grows to be a good student. He also grows to be a good teacher. He is famous for working very well with children and helping them to learn and grow in their love. But he's not a terribly successful person. And by success, I mean monetarily. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. It certainly was not because of his lack of skills. But the Jewish community in this part of the world was under enormous pressure, both internally and externally. Poland had been the ruling power of this region of the Ukraine for quite a while, until the Kamenski revolt drove the Polish overlords out, leaving behind many Jewish settlers who had come by invitation of Poland to grow the communities in the Ukraine. That is to say, the area that had been conquered. The native-born Ukrainians, not exactly a big fan of the Jews who had come along with the Poles when this area was being almost colonized at the time. So there was a lot of external repression now coming back against the Jews after the revolt against the Poles. At the same time, you also have a huge push for the status quo in the Jewish world. You're still recovering from the Shabbatai Tzvi failed messianic movement a couple hundred years earlier, well, maybe not quite that much. And as we're going to see, the repercussions of that are going to be very, very important. And so there was a lot of suspicion, as well as a lot of strange ideas floating around in the Jewish world, which is why there's a lot of suspicion. The two go together. So you have an elite wealthy class, and you have an elite learned class, and they are very mutually supportive of each other in many cases, often to the detriment of the lower classes. And by lower classes, I include in that the people who had not, by either being in the wealthy or the learned class, reached a level of spiritual activity that was appreciated by the rest of the Jewish world. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Right, so unfortunately at this time, if you were a sage, that is to say, if you were a very good rabbi and learned either in classical texts or in this new stuff called Kabbalah, then you were often given a great deal of respect and support. Kabbalah was kind of on the edge, but it was definitely making itself felt more and more. If you weren't, your spiritual value to the community consisted of showing up for services, saying the prayers that you were supposed to say and the blessings you were supposed to say, keeping the commandments, and keeping quiet. That was your spiritual life. You were one cog. You were part of the ball bearings of the spiritual world, and you did not stand out, and your spiritual worth was measured as part of the mass of Judaism rather than as an individual spiritual calling. The idea that you would rise to spiritual heights, that you had something unique to contribute spiritually or a unique connection to God, not really a big emphasis during this part of Jewish life in this part of the world. So combined with this external turmoil and problems and backlash growing against the Jewish world, together with an internal wish to have the status quo maintained, the status quo of ideas, and the status quo of the social structure, things weren't great for the average Jew. So that's the world that the Baal Shem Tov is born into.
I read that he was a good student and that he ended up teaching the classes, and helping to teach the class, and then teaching the classes in the synagogues that he was a student of. Is that the way his life went with just because I read that he also learned to do the kosher sacrifices for butchery and a whole load of other things? Is it that he just couldn't make up his mind, or
ultimately, if you want to be a sage, that is to say, if you want to make your life's work devoted to the spiritual needs and the teaching of the community, you have to find a community that's willing to pay the bill. And that was hard if you were from outside the establishment. If you weren't the son of the son of the son of a rabbi, or if you weren't, part of the wealthy class you've raised your kid up to be a scholar, and now you can support him while he's a scholar, it doesn't really work so well. So you could be a good student, you could be a brilliant student, but if no one is picking up the bill, you're going to have to do other work. You're going to have to do something else to make ends meet. And in fact, his life really didn't start taking shape until he marries this woman, Hannah, whose brother doesn't like him because he's from a sort of wealthy-ish family. But her father had made this arranged marriage uh, prior to his death, but had not been there for the actual marriage. So the Baal Shem Tov shows up. Again, he's not really the Baal Shem Tov yet. He's just, this guy, Rabbi Eliezer, or Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, and says, "Oh, by the way, your dad said that I was going to be able to marry your sister." And it's like, "And you are who?" Eventually, the sister, Hannah, agrees to the marriage, and she forces her brother to allow her father's wishes to be honored. And the brother is then, as brother-in-laws sometimes do, drawn into supporting his sister and by extension his brother-in-law, Rabbi Israel. So he helps set them up in a couple different ventures and businesses. Eventually, they end up with a tavern in the Carpathians. And I know most people don't think of the Baal Shem Tov as being a barkeep, but that was his main job until he was finally able to break out and get a gig of his own as a rabbi.
I didn't know that that was even an option for a rabbi to own a pub. I mean, had I known that, I may have took a very different career choice. What a great, yeah, I can see it now.
Well, I mean, providing hospitality to travelers is a huge mitzvah in Judaism, and this really did seat him in a place that he was able to meet people and immerse himself in different ideas and tales of travelers. It also meant that he was at the heart of a community and could see the life and the struggles of the average people of his community. It also afforded him a fair bit of time for going out and exploring nature. And one of his great teachings, of course, is that God can be experienced through the beauty of the world that God created. And this is generally believed to have been an idea that he developed during this period of his life. There in the Carpathian Mountains, it's kind of hard not to be overawed.
And didn't he spend a good amount of time at this period doing homeopathy and learning about herbs? So that must have been very helpful as well. If you're in a, see, people have got this idea that these places are just places people went to get to drink, but they lived in them all the time, and they ate in them and they lived in them and they did business in them. And I imagine that being a kind of a local health practitioner helped in that instance as well. What? So he's in this. He's in the pub. He's had a very good religious education. He's well respected. He's married. How did he turn into this? Can you tell us what?
That should have been the end of the story, right?
Right, it should be really, yeah. I mean, but how and what? Can you tell us a little bit about what his name actually means?
Right. So that really begins the journey. So he's into this, as you put it, health practitioning, which at the time, especially as the Kabbalistic influence in Europe continues to grow, really reinforces what had been part of the folk faith of Judaism, of the writing of amulets and talismans for curative or protective reasons. And one explanation of the term, Baal Shem, is that he was the master of the name. Most of these talismans and amulets were written around various combinations or depictions of God's name or names that were passed down through different Kabbalistic traditions. So being a master of the name means you are certified to be able to write amulets that work. At least that was the perception at the time. So
that a little bit?
Tov was almost like it's almost like a job title.
Is it a little bit? Now looking back, people don't do that now, right? For the most part,
for the most part, there are still some communities with these traditions, but for the most part, correct. Amulets are not a big part of Jewish life these days.
So, because I'm curious, how is that looked upon now? Because I'm sure if I stood outside a synagogue selling amulets that had some sort of supernatural protection because I'd written something in them, it wouldn't be very well received.
Well, certainly not if it were you. However,
right,
or me for that matter. However, if I was a rabbi of great standing in the right community, then absolutely it would be something that would be possible. And there are other things that continue in a similar vein, similar practices that continue to this day in some communities, many of which are descendants of the Baal Shem Tov's movement, which eventually becomes known as Hasidic Judaism. And ultimately, even though the amulet side itself is not as big of a path these days, the underlying theme behind it, that there are actions that we can do that have a spiritual impact that are disproportionate to their physical representation, which is a really fancy way of saying if you do the right thing, it can go boom. Is still very much at the heart of Hasidic Judaism. So, and in some ways, at the heart of Judaism as a whole, and we'll probably try and tease out that distinction as we go on. But so this really gets him a better reputation as having somebody who is being somebody who has a little oomph for what he's doing. That he's not just another guy who happens to be a rabbi who has some learning and who has some skills. This is somebody who seems to have an inside track, if you will, towards spiritual towards spiritual outcomes, and that really begins to establish himself as somebody that could be a leader in a community. The second part that goes with this, however, is his philosophy. He begins to preach a vision of Judaism that is a combination of Kabbalah that had come before him, but also with some radical changes, as well as a populism that goes into this at the same time. So yes, that's really what then sets him up as being more than just a master of amulets, but of someone with greater spiritual depth than that.
So, how did his teaching affect the average Jewish person? You said at the beginning that they were really part of the blizzard rather than the unique snowflake. So, how was his teaching causing their lives to be different, their spiritual lives to be different?
Right. Well, remember, this time period is when there is the beginning of the Enlightenment and the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, at the same time, and so lots of people are looking for how can we change what's going on? How can we make life better? Some of them are going to go for political solutions. Others will go for wholesale reform, hence the reform movement. Others will go for simply leaving and messianic movements, which we're going to see in a little bit. The Baal Shem Tovs, and of course others are doubling down on what's already there. Just build a wall and we'll be okay. What the Baal Shem Tov does is to say, look, you have this idea of Kabbalah, that there is a mystical path towards understanding God and connecting to God and influencing the world around us. But for most people, Kabbalah, despite what Madonna preaches, is an incredibly complicated, precise, and spiritually just demanding discipline. This is not something you do in a weekend course. This is not something that the average person can do. The technicalities of it are far too elaborate and far too involved that unless you're devoting your life to Kabbalah, you're just not going to reap the benefits the way Kabbalists describe them. And if you've ever picked up a classical Kabbalistic text, in particular something from Lurianic Kabbalah or the Zohar, which predates that, you'll realize these are not books you just open up and start reading. And these are not books that just invite you to change parts of your life in order to enjoy the spiritual splendor around you. These are books that you put your head into and study as if you were studying for becoming a doctor. And very rigorous, very almost scientific in their presentation, and very esoteric. What he does is say, there's a simpler way. That there is a simple path to the mystical experience of God, to the mystical experience of the divine, through joy. And joy simply coming from the heart's appreciation and wonder at life and the blessings around us and God's creation. And therefore, all of this other stuff is good. He doesn't reject it. But he sort of flips it 180 and says, rather than seeing the world as being this dark shell that is hiding God's presence from us, which we have to cleave and break open and crack through with difficult rituals and interpretations, the entire world is glowing with the light of God. And all you have to do is open your eyes. You will be filled with it. You'll be filled with joy. And boom, you've taken the shortcut to the mystical experience. So it really is quite a wondrous, literally wondrous philosophy that found exactly the right soil at the time. You found people who needed happiness and weren't finding it in most of the traditional ways. They weren't finding it within their own community leadership. They certainly weren't finding it with the relationship with the outside world. And they weren't finding it through most normal material ways, because life was getting increasingly hard. And he comes along and says, you can be happy no matter how bad things look, because how they look is an illusion. There is a layer of godliness and therefore joy in everything that is happening around you, even the most horrible of events. And this was extremely liberating for many, many people in this part of the world.
So you said at the beginning that he was really the founder of the Hasidic movement. Can you give us a brief rundown on what the Hasidic movement is? And I say brief. I know that it's huge.
There are books written about this, exactly.
I see when we see the traditional image of Jews dancing around in Jerusalem, and they're wearing the long, slim black jackets, the silky jackets, and the white stockings and the black shoes. They're the Hasidic Jews of Israel, right?
Yes, although it's a little bit more complicated than that, because there isn't just one uniform for a Hasidic Jew. So what happens? Let me give a little bit more about how this transforms, and maybe that will also explain Hasidic Judaism, and we can understand the chain that leads from him to today and the impact of how that's worked. So he, of course, begins to attract many followers. He eventually gets a position as the rabbi for a city, and therefore can lead his life in this. But when he passes, his followers each believe that they have the true heritage of his message. And so they establish themselves in different towns and communities, whichever are willing to ratify their vision, their view as being what the Baal Shem Tov was truly teaching. And this creates dynasties, Hasidic dynasties, where you have different rabbis who establish schools of thought, much like you might harken back to the Talmudic times of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. So you have new schools of thought that are each following followers or descendants of followers or followers of followers that begin a multi-generational chain of different Hasidic communities. Many of them, unfortunately, were mostly wiped out during the Holocaust, but there are still at least a dozen very strong Hasidic dynasties that are still up and running. Some that people are probably most familiar with are the Lubavitch movement, which has an outreach arm called Chabad. Another is the Bratslav from Rabbi Nachman.
The singers.
The singing is a huge part. The singing and the storytelling of Rabbi Nachman is legendary. And then there's Brisk and Bretzlav and all I already said Bretzlav, the Satmar and all sorts of other groups as well. You can easily find lists of major groups and where they are, because they still mostly will live tightly together as an interlock community. Because one of the things these dynasties created was a dynastic leadership, where the leadership was passed usually father to son, sometimes father to son-in-law, and that created a certain hierarchy and rigidity within these different dynasties, which is why what they wear is very uniform in both sense of the word. And this is really a reflection of that underlying idea that the physical act that you perform has spiritual ramifications. So no matter what you are doing, there is a spiritual result on a higher level. And indeed, Hasidic Judaism, like all Kabbalah, believes that those spiritual results are either helping or impeding the final redemption of the world. And therefore, if your rabbi, your rebbe, your leader, does action A in a particular way, there must be a spiritual ramification for that, and that must be the best way to do action A, whether it be putting on your coat, tying your shoes, handling your business, holding the wine cup, making the blessing over the challah, the positions of the challah as you hold them for the blessing. All of these have spiritual ramifications in the minds of the followers, and therefore all of them are followed as best as possible by the individual members of the community, down to the most minute detail. So, and that was very important in terms of long-term impact for the Baal Shem Tov to have established some of these tendencies of the looking to a singular leader, often called the tzaddik, the righteous one, as having spiritual insights that the rest of us could copy, and having spiritual coattails that the rest of us could ride, became a very important part of surviving the upheaval of the Enlightenment, and then the upheaval of immigration, and the upheaval of the Holocaust. So this was quite useful for many, many communities for navigating the changes that were coming. It was also very useful when the Frankist movements was breaking on the scene. Frankism was an offshoot of the Shabbatite Tzvi Messianism, and the Frankists were essentially going the Christian road rather than the Muslim road. And these ideas, which were quite radical, and you can look them up if you like, were making some other inroads. And the Baal Shem Tov was part of the movement to stop it from infecting Judaism proper. So he recognized limits on what could be a new way of looking at Judaism, and he did fight in the groups against the Frankists, who had, like I said, very radical ideas involving the liberation of the sparks of God trapped within that which is forbidden, which is basically license to sin. And he was very adamant in his opposition to them.
So it seems to me that what he's brought to the table is a freedom to have a spiritual outlook on life without perhaps the rigidity of a formal religion. In that, the peasant person generally wouldn't be able to go to religious school for 15 years. They were too busy working for their dad. But this maybe threw the door open to find a relationship with their creator in a more practical living environment. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. One analogy that I think is appropriate is, I don't know if you've ever studied music or learned to play an instrument, but there are sort of two different sorts of music instruction out there. One starts you off with a big book called Music Theory, and they don't let you anywhere near an instrument because you're not prepared for that. You don't understand music.
Yeah, just in case you hurt somebody.
Yeah, well, you're going to make bad notes, and you'll learn bad habits, and you won't really understand what you're doing anyway, and you won't appreciate what you're doing because you don't really understand it. So why should I let you near the piano? Right? Let other people play the piano. You study, and when you're ready, and you understand how music works, when you understand the theory behind it, then you can play, and it'll be great. And what the Baal Shem Tovs came by and said, no, piano's for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're doing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or whether you can do Beethoven. What matters is that you play with joy. And that really, even outside of the Hasidic movement, has been a remarkably important contribution to maintaining Judaism in the face of the adversity that came in the wake of his life, and the challenges that freedom has brought. The staid forms of Judaism of Eastern Europe that he was attacking would have certainly driven more and more people away from Judaism if he had not brought in this notion that someone can serve God with love without having gotten through all 10 volumes of music theory book. And they would have rushed headlong into some other spiritual life if they had not had this option. And even the other forms of Judaism, the other movements and other denominations have adopted much of this basic philosophy that one can experience joy of God in nature, that one can experience joy of God without formal study, and that there should be an internal component to every act that we do. That it's not just enough to do the act according to the law, that the law is there to make sure we do it right and to make sure that the spiritual result is a resounding success. It's not there as the end, it's there as the beginning. And that reminder, which again is not unique to him, that there are many other classical texts that remind us of this, but in his day and age, that reminder was absolutely necessary because it was becoming lost in the style of Judaism in his day, or the style that dominated, I should say, among the elite. Like I said, there are whole books that can be written about just him,
Yeah.
and volumes of books written about Hasidic Judaism and its development, and how it went from this revolutionary to being a conservative theology. But we'll tackle some of the other Hasidic masters another time.
Yeah, I've enjoyed that very much, and who knew? Well, I didn't. You did. That so much of what I recognise as traditional. So I don't want to say traditional Judaism because that isn't fair, but there's a very specific icon of what a Jewish person looks like, and it seems that much of that was born from his life and the legacy that he left
Correct.
with those
The
teachers.
iconic Jew, by virtue of the fact that the most identifiable representation of a Jew was born in the aftermath of his revolution, and yes, that is something that many people don't think about. They think of that as being, as you put it, traditional, but traditional really isn't the right word. It was revolutionary in his day, and traditional Judaism has always been about the process more than the particular form. But that's probably a conversation for another day.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. That was really awesome. We will be back again next week with another one. I'm not even sure who that is. Well, I'll find out. I'm not going to tell you.
I'll
Thank,
keep it secret this time.
thank you very much, Rabbi Neely. It was really good fun to go through that again.
Thank you, Jason.
We see you all again very soon. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to go over to Rabbi Neely's channel. There'll be a link under this video where you can see his weekly Torah portion classes and the half Torah show that we do. So you can get even more goodness over there. And we'll see you all again next week.